All right, today is week 2 of Christian-ish, and this is a series that builds very, very heavily on the first week. And so if you missed out, that's okay. I'm going to take a minute and get you caught up. And as I do, if you are interested at all in digging deeper into what I talk about for the next couple minutes, you can always catch up online at citynorth.church or on our YouTube channel. Either way, those are great ways to catch up. So today, part 2 of Christian-ish. This is an important series, I think, because it's a series that's easy for us as American Christians, especially to struggle with some of the things we're going to talk about and maybe not even know it. And it's a big deal because, biblically speaking, to be Christian-ish, which I'm going to define in a minute, to be Christian-ish is nauseating to God. I won't go into detail about that. I did last week and got some angrily worded emails. I didn't actually, I'm just kidding about that, but it was a little graphic. So I won't go back into that again, but the idea is that to be Christian-ish is to be Christian-ish is to be Christian enough to believe in Jesus, but not to behave like Jesus. That's kind of the working definition. We're Christian enough to believe in Jesus, but not to behave like Jesus. And again, biblically speaking, this is something that is frankly nauseating to God. He doesn't like it when we're kind of straddling the fence, when we're 1 foot in, 1 foot out. He doesn't like it when we're hot and cold at the same time, when we're kind of lukewarm. He wants us to pick. And so, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, what happens is when we live in a culture and in a society where we don't have to depend on God for literally our daily sustenance, we can become very self-dependent, and that's what typically leads to this place where we believe in Jesus, but we don't really behave like Jesus. And so that's what this series is all about. It's kind of trying to help us get through that and figure out how to undo it and live in a way that honors, that pleases God, and that ultimately is better for us too. So our main verse, our main passage last week that we were in was from John chapter 15. Now, this isn't in your message notes, but I just want to kind of remind you where we've been. This is what Jesus says in John 15. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me, that word remains important. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit, but apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you're like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. So the whole idea here is we talk about what does it mean to be Christian-ish and how do we avoid it? Well, the way we avoid being Christian-ish is by remaining connected to the vine. And that's, again, I'm not going to re-preach last week's message, but Jesus says that when you're connected to him the right way, you bear fruit. You bear this one specific kind of fruit that looks very different than the kind of fruit we bear if we're not connected to the vine. And we focused in on that connection, or we focused in on that word, if you remain in me. It's like this idea of dwelling or of living in, of lodging with, of like that being our center and our source. And we talked about focusing on our connection with God rather than the production of good things in our lives. Now, again, that's all recap. But it brings us to today because what we're going to do today and over the next couple weeks is we're going to address a big problem that happens. Now, I've been in ministry a long time. I turned 40 in a couple of months, and I started in full-time professional ministry when I was 22, so I'm almost 2 decades into this, which is, I don't really even care to think about that, to be honest with you, but I'm almost 2 decades into this, and in that time, I've talked with a lot of people, I've heard a lot of people's stories, and beyond that, I've been a part of churches for my whole life. I mean, this is all I've ever really done. And so I've seen a lot of patterns, I've seen a lot of common trends in people's lives, and one of the biggest that I see all the time is I see people who are really, really, really trying to remain connected to Jesus, but they're not seeing the fruit produced in the way that it ought to be or that they think it should. They have this expectation in their minds of like, if I'm working hard to stay connected and I'm focusing on Jesus and staying connected to him, then the Bible says I'm going to grow the fruit of the Spirit, but like I'm not seeing that in my life. And it can be very discouraging. It can be very frustrating. It can be very overwhelming to even figure out, where do I start? How do I figure out what the issue is here? And that might be some of you. There might be some of us today that have been trying our very, very best to live for God, to stay connected to the vine. Maybe we didn't use those words, but we've been really trying. but we just don't see the fruit growing in our lives. We don't know how to reconcile that. And so today and for the next 2 weeks, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the passage I just read. We're going to look just beyond it, at the next words Jesus speaks, and we're going to identify 3 different things that are unfortunately very common that will just sever that connection right now. I mean, like right now. And for some of us, it's very possible, I would say it's very likely, as a matter of fact, that some of us have 1, 2, or possibly even all 3 of these things present in our lives. And although we're trying to do all the right, and we're trying to read our Bible and we're trying to pray, and we like, hey, you're here this morning, like you're attending church services, and maybe you're even involved, maybe you're serving, like you're doing all these Christian things, but the connection just still, you're not experiencing the fruit. And if that's the case for you, then I would guess, I don't want to say that there's only 3 things that can disconnect us, but my guess is probably you're dealing with 1 or more of these. So I hope today or the next couple weeks will be helpful in terms of identifying, like maybe I am struggling with a disconnection here and I don't know it, but I don't even know what to do. So we're going to jump in right after what I just read from John 15. Jesus has said, if you remain in me, then you'll bear much fruit. He's gone through all this, and now he makes things a little bit more concrete. Because the problem with the vine and branches metaphor is that it's abstract. Like, okay, so Jesus says, if you remain in me, you'll bear much fruit. But like, what does that mean? What does it actually look like to remain in Jesus? Fortunately, we don't have to look far because Jesus recognizes that this is an abstract concept and he needs to make it a little bit more concrete. So starting in John 15, verse 9, immediately after where we just left off, Jesus says this: as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now, remain in, not in me, remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. In other words, Jesus is saying, look, there's a natural way this works, and I've modeled it for you. I've shown you this. At this point, Jesus has been walking with the disciples. They've been following him for about 3 years. They've seen Jesus. They've seen the way he lives day in, day out, moment in and moment out. In the good times and the hard times, they've seen it all. And Jesus is saying, look, what I'm asking you to do is not something that I wasn't willing to do. It's something I've been doing already. You've seen it. So just as I've kept my Father's commands and remained in his love, that's what you need to do. And then he says, I've told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. Now, this is relatively straightforward. It's like we don't need to do a bunch of work of like, what's the Greek say here and all that stuff that sometimes we've got to do. It's relatively straightforward. If you remain in me, you will bear much fruit. But if you don't remain in me, you won't bear much fruit. So remain in me. The way you remain in me is by keeping my commands. You've seen me do this. I've done it with the Father in heaven. And I want that for you so that you'll have joy. Like real joy. Now, this is actually the 3rd time in this particular teaching that Jesus has connected love with keeping commands. It's the 3rd time. This is actually a very long section where Jesus is talking for a while. And a little bit earlier in it, he says, if you love me, keep my commands. And then just a little bit after that, he says, if you keep my commands, you will remain in my love. Sorry, that's jumping. Hold on. 15:21. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. So he says almost the exact same thing. And then he talks for a few more minutes and he returns to this idea of love and command, love and keeping commands being very, very tightly connected. There are dozens of places throughout the Bible that this is demonstrated. Like where this connection between loving God and doing what God says, where they are just directly linked to one another. Dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of places where this is connected in the Bible. In fact, all the way back to Deuteronomy chapter 5, where God is really establishing what it means for his people to live as his people. Again, this is just one example, but he says, oh, that their hearts, this is God speaking to Moses, oh, that their hearts would be inclined to fear me and to keep all my commands always, so that it might go well with them and their children forever. There's a couple important things happening here that I want to point out for just a moment. The first is pull that back up for me, Maria, if you would please. The first is that we did some colors here to make it easy to see the connections here. We've got the keep commands thing, but we've also got an all and always thing going on. Because at the end of the day, although Jesus doesn't emphasize this particular part of it in John chapter 15, he doesn't need to. Because to the people he's speaking to, they would have understood this from the very beginning of their story. They would have known this, that all throughout the dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of examples of loving God and keeping commands being linked, there's another piece of the puzzle that is constantly linked, and that's that it's not an opt-in, opt-out situation. It's an always situation. That one of the things that it looks like to keep God's commands is that we do it all the time. Not that we get to pick and choose. It's that it's all the time, always. You can think about this a little bit, and specifically if we go back to the John 15 passage and talking about Jesus saying, I want you to do this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. We can think about it a little bit like plugging a lamp into a socket. We have a couple outlets. We live in a very, very old house, and there's a couple of outlets that are they're not great, and we rent the house, so I'm not about to go spend my money to fix them, but they're loose. The connection isn't great, and so you can plug a plug all the way into the socket, and it'll work. But if that sucker comes even, a tenth of an inch loose, it doesn't work. It's so annoying. Any of you that have ever had, you know how obnoxious. It's like the thing's all the way in there, and then you go check. You're like, I just plugged it in. You go check, and it's wiggled itself out just a tiny bit. We can think about this remaining in God's love, keeping it. We can think about it in the same kind of way. The reality is what Jesus is saying is that if we're to abide in his love and then produce the kind of fruit he wants us to produce, the only way we can do it is by being completely plugged in. And the way we stay completely plugged in is obeying all that he says. If we obey most of what he says, but we choose not to obey a little bit, it's like that plug that's worked itself just a tiny bit out. To just glance at it, you might think, well, I'm connected. But the reality is the circuit can't connect. And when the circuit can't connect, the electricity can't flow. And when the electricity can't flow, the light can't come on. And it's just that simple. Like when we talk about Jesus saying, remain in me. Now, what does it mean to remain in me? You keep my commands. It's an all or nothing situation. And one of the biggest things that I see in other people's lives, and one of the biggest things that I've experienced in my own life, is that when I'm feeling disconnected from God, in the vast majority of cases, it's because I'm practicing selective obedience. I'm not doing all that God says. I'm doing most of what God says. Because here's the reality. Like when we talk about this idea, we talk about obeying God. Most of us here today are probably obeying God in almost every way in our lives. But also for most of us, there are probably some ways where we're not. And this is especially common, again, in a culture where we don't grow up being dependent on God the way that we might have to be in other cultures. When we get to be in control in our lives, when we get to be the bosses in our own lives, when we're raised with that being like a virtue, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and you can make yourself into whatever you want. When those things are virtues, what tends to happen is we tend to begin to decide what parts of what God says we like and don't like. We tend to start to decide what parts of what God says make sense to us and what parts don't. And we'll follow the things God says that we're like, yeah, I like that. That makes sense to me. But the things that we don't like, we sometimes don't obey. One of the ones that I wrestle with a lot, parenting is such an interesting thing because some days you're like, man, I'm killing it. I'm good at this. Most days you're like, I'm the worst human that's ever lived. I'm just the worst parent, and I couldn't get worse than me. It's not possible. And you don't tell people that because, it's like, people are like, no, you're probably pretty good. And you're like, no, but you don't know. You don't know. You're not there. You're not there when my kid wakes me up in the middle of the night. You don't know. By the way, just as a side note, if you're mean enough to your kids in the middle of the night, they will stop coming to you and they will go to the other person. So I'll let you figure out who is who in our house. But there's one of us they don't bug in the middle of the night anymore because they're very uncaring in the middle of the night. So it's me. I'm the uncaring one. And they don't bug me. They used to all the time. They only go to Vanessa now. Because in the middle of the night, I'm a jerk. I don't like to get woken up. I don't like surprises. Like in general, I don't like surprises in life. And so like to be surprised out of the sleep that I was enjoying is one of the worst things you can do. And I'm like, what? Dad, I just needed a hug. Fine. Like not the best. Okay. Well, did you know that the Bible says parents, fathers, don't provoke your children to anger? Ugh. I don't like that one. I don't like that one very much because I'm not very good at it. Sometimes I'm really good at it, but other times I'm not. Now, am I like living in blatant disobedience to that? No. But the point is there's all kind of things in the Bible. There's all kind of things that God might speak to our heart about that we might go, okay, God, I'm in for that, and I'm in for that, and I'm in for that, and I'm in for that. But that thing, I don't know about that thing. I don't like that thing. And we'll work these loopholes in. And we'll come up with ways to get around just simply doing what God says. But again, it's a big deal because just like a lamp in a loose socket, the second that plug comes detached, even the smallest bit, the electricity, the current can't flow. In our case, the fruit can't grow. And so when Jesus says, if you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, it's not an opt-in, opt-out situation. The reality is when it comes to obeying Jesus, obeying some is the same as disobeying. And again, like as a parent, I understand this dynamic. And we deal with this all the time with our kids. It's like, hey, did you do what we asked? Yes. Are you sure? Yes. Okay, now I'm gonna go double check. Well, you didn't do this or this or this or this. Now, if it's legitimately they just don't see it, that's one thing. But man, if it's just they didn't try, if it's they didn't really care, that's a whole different thing. It makes me angry because what it says to me is you don't really matter to me all that much. That's not the way we phrased it historically, right? It's like, when I was growing up, it was like, I won't tell you which one of my parents said these kind of things, but it was like we pay for the roof over your head. You have food on the table. You don't have to worry about things, so just do what we say. Now, to be clear, I say the same things to my kids now. It seems to have less effect. I don't know what's happened to the water they drink, but it seems like it doesn't matter as much now as it did then. But we say those kind of things, but what are we really saying under the hood when we as parents say those kind of things? You're saying you do not appreciate who I am to you, which is to say you do not care all that much about me. See, when we disobey a little bit, what we communicate to God is that he's not that important to us. We communicate to God that he's only important when we think he's important. That what he says can only be trusted as much as we understand it, which is to say, again, as a parent, I understand this dynamic. It's like you either listen to all that I say or you don't. But if you choose not to, what you're effectively saying to me is, I don't really respect you. I don't really care that much about you. And so when it comes to God and Jesus says, if you remain in me, you will obey my commands, it's an all or nothing situation. If we're only selectively obedient to what God says, that is a full-on disconnection. It's not a we'll grow some fruit. It's a it ain't gonna grow at all situation. So this is a big deal. I mean, it's huge. So at the end of the day, what I would say is if we want to consider what are the main things that can cause us to disconnect and that don't look like all the Christian-y church people kind of things. I'm reading my Bible, I'm praying, all these different things. You can be doing all those things, but if you're selectively obeying what God says, none of it will matter all that much because you're disconnected from the source. Or again, just to say it as simply as possible, we cannot be connected when we choose which commands to keep. Can't be. It's not possible. It is completely impossible. So, if we can't be connected when we're choosing which commands to keep, the solution to that seems pretty simple, just do what God says. And that's true, but that's hard. It's really, really hard. And it's really hard for a number of different reasons. One is for some of us, we may not know, we may not have a great prayer life. We may struggle with prayer. And so it's hard from that standpoint. For some of us, maybe we don't really know how to read the Bible. The Bible is confusing to us, so we just don't. So it can be hard from that standpoint. Maybe we've got some like relational pain, and so we don't connect with people very well. And so we don't have friends or people around us who are helping lead us to Jesus. Like, it can be hard for a number of reasons. But one of the biggest is that life is hard. And when life gets hard, when life gets busy, when life gets overwhelming, we, all people throughout all of history, have a tendency to look at what's right in front of our face and forget about the bigger picture of what's around us. And so we get fixated on the problem here, or the problem here, or the problem there, or the problem there. This week our kids went back to school on Thursday, which is a great day in our household. For me, it's not a great day for Vanessa. It's a really weird just difference. I'm like, let's throw a party. Like, let's just have the best day ever, and Vanessa's weeping. And so I don't always know how to balance that very well. But it is, it's a thing. And so they go back to school, and that's great. And it's wonderful for some of us, and for others it's not. But the reality is, for both of us, whether we're in the party throwing camp or the weeping camp, there's a lot of things leading into that. It's a busy season, right? We're getting school supplies and clothes, and by we, I mostly mean Vanessa, but we are doing it. And we're navigating all the emotions. Brooklyn started middle school this year, and that's a whole thing. Every year she gets really anxious before the school year starts, and she just, she worries about, like, am I gonna have friends in my class? And she's super excited a week in, but leading into it, there's just a lot of fear, a lot of nervousness. So we're navigating all that, and we're also navigating Mason, who doesn't really know how to talk about how he feels ever, and so we don't know. And then there's Gavin, who mostly just says whatever Mason says. So we're trying to figure out what he thinks, and it's just a lot. Like, it's a lot to navigate, it's a lot to manage, and it's good. Don't get me wrong. It's a good thing. It's a great thing, but it's a lot. And so what happens in this season of life is we get inundated with that, and we're thinking about that, and we're talking about that, and we're focused on our kids and getting our kids back to school, and it being a really, really good thing. And you know what tends to happen in that season? We just don't focus as much on the Lord. It's just because we're busy. And right now it's back to school, but here in a few weeks it'll be something else. And then a couple weeks after that, it'll be something else. We just got Brooklyn's softball schedule for the fall, and we found out that her practices for like 2 or 3 weeks are on Mondays and Wednesdays. And then for 2 or 3 weeks, they're on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then they shift back to Mondays, and then back to Tuesdays and Thursdays. And it's super annoying. Like, why would you do that? It doesn't make sense. So we got to manage that. And like, life's busy, and life's challenging, and for us, a lot of it is our kids, but life's busy. And when life is busy and when life is challenging, our focus comes off the Lord. We get distracted, and that's normal. There's nothing wrong with that. But we can't just go, oh, well, I'm just gonna obey what God says. Because if we do that, we're setting ourselves up for failure. So how do we actually do this? How do we actually make sure that we're obeying God fully? We're gonna look at 3 different passages. We're just gonna kind of popcorn through, which I don't love to do, but there's 3 different passages here that kind of pull out this one big principle that, again, happens actually a lot through the Bible, but it's gonna zero us in today on how we do this well. The first is from Luke chapter 9. This is Jesus talking, and he says this: whoever wants to be my disciple, my follower, must deny themselves. They must take up their cross daily, and they must follow me. Now, if you've been in church very long, you've probably heard this verse at least once. Whoever wants to be my disciple, if you want to be my follower, in other words, for our purposes today, if you want to remain connected to the vine, you have to deny yourself, take up your cross daily, and follow me. There's a couple quick things here. When we read this, we probably get like images in our mind of, Jesus dying on the cross, and like it creates a certain emotion in us, a gratefulness perhaps. To the people Jesus was saying this to, they would not have felt that way, because they watched people be crucified. There were probably people they knew that had been crucified. They had seen people nailed to Roman crosses who slowly died of suffocation over several days. It was an ugly image. And so when Jesus says you must deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me, those people would have felt a weight in that statement that we don't necessarily feel. What Jesus is saying is you got to deny yourself and then you got to die. You got to die. That's what you got to do to follow me. And you've got to do it every single day. Now, the Apostle Paul picks up on this same theme in the book of Galatians, where he writes, I have been crucified with Christ. Crucified, cross theme again. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Again, Paul's picking up this theme, and he's saying, listen, I have made a decision that I'm dead. Paul no longer lives. It's now Jesus in me. Well, there's not a whole lot more you could say that more directly is stating, I am giving God utter control over everything that I do, over even my body. The things that I do are not me. The things that I do are Christ in me. Now, Paul would be the first one to say that he doesn't get everything right. We're not going to get into that right now. But he would be the first to say that doesn't mean he gets everything exactly right. But what Paul is identifying is he's picking up on this same thing, this same theme, and he is underscoring the significance of the fact that we can't be the ones in charge. Because as soon as we're in charge, God isn't. It's all or nothing. Paul, in another place in Romans chapter 12, writes, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. This is a little bit of a side note. Did you guys know that like what we did here with music and stuff, and that's like, you can worship through that, but that's not worship. Like we don't even call it the worship team because it's not. It's a music team. According to Paul, what we do day in and day out, moment in, moment out, the small decisions, the big decisions, the ways that every day we lay ourselves down and give control to God, that's worship. That's what worship is. The way you interact with people in your job is worship. The way you interact with your kids is worship. The integrity with which you run your business is worship. The ways that you interact when you've got to make a phone call and have a hard conversation or avoid it, not do it at all, you're worshiping something. What Paul's saying is that our job as Christians, our responsibility as Christians, as followers of Jesus, playing off of what Jesus said, is to offer ourselves, everything that we are, including our bodies, which is to say our mind, our heart, our hands, our feet, our actions, our words, our tongue. It's to offer all of that to God in a way that says, God, I recognize that I'm not you. I can't be, but I want you to be who lives in me today. I don't want it to be me at all. I want it to be you. Now, to rewind again just a tiny bit, last week we talked a lot about the acts of the flesh versus the fruit of the Spirit. Isn't it interesting that as Paul talks about this, he's talking about flesh, our body. See, as long as our body is what's alive, as long as the way we're operating day in and day out in life is to preserve, sustain, and benefit ourselves and our bodies, we will be living in the acts of the flesh. The only way to ensure that we aren't living that way and that we are connected to the vine and growing the fruit of the Spirit is to crucify that part of ourselves, to kill it wholesale, so that it's no longer us who live, but Christ in us. If you hold back any part of yourself from God, you will become disconnected because you will not keep his commands. That's just the human condition. You won't, I won't. In the seasons in life where I get way off kilter in this regard, it's always because I'm choosing myself. In the moments where I'm impatient, where I'm whatever, it's always because I want what I want. I want what feels good to me. I don't want to be bothered. I just leave me alone. I want what I want. Always, 100% of the time. And so when we talk about the acts of the flesh versus the fruit of the Spirit, when we go, well, how do we grow the fruit of the Spirit? Oh, we do it by being connected to the vine. Well, what does it mean to be connected to the vine? It means to keep God's commands. Oh, what does it mean to keep God's commands? It means we have to die. We have to die so that he can live. It's the only way it's even remotely possible. And so, how do we get this right? What do we do every day? If you're like, okay, I recognize that I'm not maybe growing the fruit of the Spirit. I want to, but I'm trying hard, but I don't know what to do because something's not working. Well, the first question I would have is, are you practicing selective obedience? Are you practicing in your life? Do you make it a habit to do some of what God says, but maybe not other things? Are there things that God's worked on your heart in the past about maybe an attitude, maybe a behavior, maybe the words that you speak, maybe an issue of unforgiveness in your life from some wound, maybe, I don't know what it is. Is there something God has worked on your heart about and you've just kind of been like, I don't know. If that's the case, then I can promise you that you're unplugged from the socket. I can promise you that you're disconnected from the vine. Because you cannot remain connected to the vine when you're choosing what commands to keep and what commands to ignore. So the way we fix it is every day you have to give up your right to choose when God's right. Because here's the deal, you have a right to listen to God or not. He gave you that right when he made you. God didn't make us robots. He didn't make us, he didn't create us in a way where we can't make choices. He gave us the ability to choose what we will and will not do. And he did it because that's the only way that love actually works. Love without free will is just control. So God didn't do that. He built into us the ability to think, the ability to reason, the ability to choose. And he gave us the right to do it freely, however we want. The problem for so many of us is that we exercise that right to choose whether we think God's right all the time. And instead of when God speaks to us, instead of when we see a command in the Bible, instead of just saying, okay, God, if you say it, I'll do it, we argue with him. And we give ourselves those loopholes and we come up with ways around it so we don't have to obey. And there's story upon story upon story in the Bible of people doing exactly this, where God eventually in some way confronts them and he's like, hey, did you do what I said? And they're like, yeah, we did what you said. We did this and this and this and this. He's like, yeah, but I said that. It's like, caught with my hand in the cookie jar. In my experience, this is probably one of the most significant ways that people disconnect from God. They're doing most things right. They're obeying God in most ways. Maybe it's you. Maybe you're obeying God in most ways. Maybe you're obeying God 98% of the time. But there's just this stuff that he's been working on your heart about you won't do. You won't surrender. You won't give up. You won't listen. And if that's the case, no matter how hard you try, no matter how much Bible you read, no matter how many times you pray, no matter whether you sing the songs or lift your hands, or no matter how many times you attend church services, it will not matter. It won't matter because God isn't interested in those things. If you love me, keep my commands. If you love me, keep my commands. So every day, you've got to give up your right to choose when God is right, because God is always right. We don't get to make that choice. Now, to finish this up today, that's a hard thing to grapple with because we like control. We all like control a whole lot. But when I think about standing before God one day and giving an account of my life and talking to him about what I did and didn't do, what I like to think is that I'll be able to stand before him and I'll be able to say, hey, I may not have always heard you correctly. I may not have always understood what you were asking of me, but I did my very best to do what you asked. And I can say with certainty that I've not always gotten it right. What I want to be able to do is stand before God and say, when I knew you were talking to me, I listened. When I knew you were speaking to me, I obeyed. When I knew you told me to do something, I did it. And for those of you that maybe struggle a little bit with like imagining giving up control to this level in your life, I guess that's the question that I would ask you is how's that going for you? Like, how's it working? Do you feel a sense of peace and contentment? Do you feel, as Jesus said, a sense of joy in your life? Or do you feel a sense of struggle and of wrestling all the time? Because when we play God in our lives, when we pick and choose what to obey and what not to obey of God, you know what it does? It robs us of joy. And it robs us of joy because all of a sudden, we, somewhere deep in our soul, we know we're playing a game we weren't designed to play. You know where joy and like real peace comes from? It comes from knowing that you aren't God, and you don't have to be. All you have to do is listen to him and do what he says. So that one day you'll be able to stand before him and go, I don't know if I heard you right all the time, but I know that when I heard you, I obeyed. There is all kind of peace in that. That's what I want for me, that's what I want for my kids, and that's what I want for each of you. So, we're gonna pray here in a moment, and as we do, as we prepare for that, I'm gonna even ask you now, like, if you're in a spot in your life right now where you recognize that maybe you've been doing all the Christian things, you've been trying, you've been doing your best, but you just haven't felt connected to God. There hasn't been that fruit growing in your life. I want you to take a moment to be real honest with yourself. Are you practicing selective obedience? Are you practicing only obeying some of what God says? Maybe most. But are there things in your life that you know God has said to you that you just aren't doing? And if that's the case, when I pray here in a minute, I'm gonna pray for you, and I'm gonna ask you to be real honest in kind of a feedback moment. And we'll get to that, but I'm gonna ask you to be real honest and to be willing to say that that's who you are, not out loud to everybody, to be clear, but because I want to be able to pray for you, and I want to be able to pray for myself in the seasons when I fall into this as well. So let's go to God together and hopefully find some healing for that. Father in heaven.